The universe is not born from silence. It was born from a vibration, a pulse, a living current that older civilizations called many things. Some called it the breath of stars. Others named it the first chord. But the beings who first learned to measure it, to bend it, to channel it through crystalline arrays and living circuits, they called it Odi. Odi was not magic. It was not science in any conventional sense. It was the underlying connective tissue of all dimensional layers, the medium through which realities touched one another like soap bubbles pressed together in an infinite dark sea. And for 400,000 years, humanity knew absolutely nothing about it. That changed in the year 1223 of the Common Era, in a small village outside the city of Cologne, in the Holy Roman Empire, where a woman named Hildegard of the Black Veil stood in the center of a collapsed mineshaft and refused to die. She had fallen 60 feet. Every bone in her left side should have shattered on impact. Instead, she landed in a chamber that should not have existed, filled with a faint green-gold luminescence that pulsed and slow, rhythmic waves along the walls, like a heartbeat. She reached out a hand. The light reached back. What happened in that chamber over the next 9 days is not recorded in any surviving document, because Hildegard burned every page she wrote. She told only one person, her apprentice, a young boy named Guy, and she made him swear on his mother's grave that he would only teach it to someone worthy. He taught 3 people. Each of those 3 taught 3 more. And so by the year 1400, there were 47 human beings on Earth who could feel Odi, who could sense its flows through the dimensional layers the way a blind person learns to feel air currents from an open window. They called themselves the Flowing Order. They built nothing visible. They left no monuments. They operated in absolute silence, passing knowledge through coded manuscripts, through oral tradition, through a peculiar method of teaching that involved sitting in complete darkness for days at a time until the student could perceive the OD lines threading through the floor beneath them. This is the story the Galactic Compact never knew. This is the part of human history that the Xenological Survey archives classify as simply pre-contact, cultural development, low technological index, no dimensional capability detected. They were spectacularly, catastrophically wrong. Like, subscribe, and share. The Galactic Compact had discovered OD in the year 7441 of their standard calendar, which corresponded to approximately 2300 BCE. On Earth's timeline, their discovery came not through meditation or patience, or a woman falling into a glowing mineshaft. It came through the animated realm. The animated realm was not a place you could fly to. It was a dimensional layer adjacent to physical reality, a space where OD existed in its densest and most accessible form, where it moved in visible currents and eddies that could be harvested the way a water wheel harvests a river. The Compact called it the Shalvarok, which translates roughly as the place where energy has a face. They built enormous structures called resonance anchors at the dimensional boundaries, vast geometric arrays that could punch through the membrane between physical space and the animated realm, draw OD through in controlled quantities, and use it to power dimensional warping drives. With OD-powered warping, the Compact could fold space. They could open stable wormholes. They could alter the local flow of time around a star system. They could, in extreme circumstances, collapse or expand the dimensional layers themselves, which is a capability roughly equivalent to being able to decide whether gravity will work differently today. They were, by every metric the Compact used to measure galactic power, essentially gods. They had been essentially gods for 4,000 years by the time they found Earth. The survey probe designated S7741 Terran entered the solar system on what would have been Earth's April 14th in the year 2031 C. It was not looking for intelligence. It was looking for dimensional boundary stability. The outer edges of the solar system showed unusual OD-current readings, not in the animated realm, but in physical space. In the baseline dimensional layer where OD usually moved in slow, predictable tidal patterns, like a barely perceptible magnetic field, the readings were wrong. Not catastrophically wrong, not crisis wrong, just slightly, persistently, impossibly wrong. The probe sent back its data. The Compact filed a report, and nobody thought about it again for 63 years. Earth, in the year 2094 C, was not the gleaming utopia some had hoped for or the scorched ruin others had feared. It was complicated. 12 billion people, a patchwork of climate-managed zones and still wild storm corridors. Fusion power that was cheap but not free. Cities that floated on the ocean and cities that had sunk into it, a low-grade space presence. Mostly orbital industry and a modest Martian colony of about 800,000 people. And the flowing order, which by that year had grown to an estimated 14,000 practitioners worldwide. The flowing order was not a secret anymore. Not exactly. They operated openly enough, though they described themselves in deliberately vague terms to the general public. A meditative tradition, a perceptual discipline, a school of applied consciousness studies. Most people assumed they were some kind of sophisticated mindfulness cult. This assumption was strongly encouraged by the Order's senior members. What the Order actually was, by 2094, was the most sophisticated OD manipulation tradition. In the physical layer of the Milky Way galaxy, they did not know this. They had no way of knowing it. As far as they were aware, they were alone in their understanding. They worked in the dark, as they always had. They had learned to follow a decurrence, the way a river pilot learns to read water. They had developed techniques for riding dimensional eddies to accelerate local perception, not time travel, but something stranger. A kind of dimensional thinning, where the boundary between layers became temporarily permeable to a trained consciousness. They had mapped over 800 years of collective practice, every major OD line on Earth. They had identified 17 points where those lines intersected in patterns that created natural dimensional instabilities. 3 of those points were in the ocean. 2 were in places no human had yet reached on Earth's surface. 1 was in a disused subway tunnel beneath London. 1 was in a mountain monastery in Bhutan, and 1 was in a quiet suburb of Reykjavik, Iceland, beneath a woman's garage. Her name was Dr. Sina Aled, and she was the Order's current deep flow master, which is a title that sounds mystical but primarily means she was the person who had mapped the most OD lines and had the clearest perceptual access to the dimensional boundary layer. She was 57 years old. She drove a very old electric car. She liked cold weather and disliked ceremony. She was in her garage practicing dimensional perception drills when the first alien ship entered Earth's orbital space. Like, subscribe, and share. The compact vessel was called the Serene Persistence of Understanding. It was a diplomatic survey craft, not military, crewed by 43 Vethkai. The dominant species of the compact, alongside various specialist crew from 11 other member species. The Vethkai looked too humanized. Something like a cross between a very tall person and an origami crane. Long, folded limbs, a head that extended back and up in a graceful, tapered crest, and eyes that could perceive OD flows directly in the visual spectrum. Their leader was called Fleet Analyst Shavar, and she had been chosen for this mission specifically because of her reputation for patience. She would need it. The Compact had decided, after 63 years of intermittent debate, to make contact with Earth. The decision had been driven by updated sensor sweeps showing that the OD anomalies around the solar system had gotten measurably larger. Not larger in a threatening way, just larger, deeper, more organized. The Compact's dimensional scientists had a word for this pattern. The word was Kulchith, which means the grooves left by water that has passed through the same channel for a very long time. It meant the dimensional layer around Earth had been shaped by use. Centuries of use. Regular, deliberate, sophisticated use. This was considered essentially impossible for a civilization rated at Earth's technological level. Shavarathan had reviewed the original survey data personally. Earth was a Type B world, late industrial period with early post-industrial emergence. Fusion power. Basic orbital capacity. No dimensional technology detected. She looked at the Kolshith readings. She looked at the Type B classification. She requested a full rescan of the solar system's OD layer. The rescan took 11 days. When it came back, Shavarathan sat in her command chair for a long time without moving, which in Vethkai body language indicated either profound thought or mild distress. The rescan showed ODU's signatures corresponding to an active tradition of approximately 800 years duration. No resonance anchors, no dimensional engines, no technology of any kind. Just woos, sustained, patterned, intentional. hence OD manipulation by beings operating in physical space without any of the tools the compact considered necessary for OD interaction. Shavaretan composed her first report to the Compact High Council. It was 3 sentences long. The inhabitants of System S77 for 1 Terran have been manually interacting with OD flows for approximately 800 years without technological assistance. Their dimensional signatures indicate a tradition of considerable sophistication. I recommend immediate diplomatic contact before we do anything else. The response from the High Council took 4 days to arrive. It said, "This is clearly sensor malfunction. Please run diagnostics and resubmit." Shavaretan ran the diagnostics. Nothing was malfunctioning. She also, quietly, began learning everything available in the Compact's xenological archives about Earth. Sina Alday was the first human to see the Compact ship, in the sense that she perceived it through odesense before any telescope or radar had registered its approach. She was in her garage. She felt it the way you might feel a very large stone dropped into a still pond. A ripple through the OD layers, a disturbance in the dimensional currents. Large and alien and absolutely unmistakably technological. She sat up straight. She said, out loud, to no one, "Oh, so they're real." Then she called the Order's Emergency Council. The Emergency Council convened within 6 hours. 17 senior practitioners connecting through encrypted channels, most of them in their homes or offices. To most outside observers, looking like people on a boring video call. Sina had given them the technical details in a pre-meeting brief. The council's first hour was spent in what an outside observer would have called very quiet, very focused discussion. What it actually was 14,000 years of combined OD perception experience being brought to bear on a single question. What are we looking at? The consensus, reached by the end of the first hour, was this. The object in orbit was powered by OD, not by OD, the way a campfire is powered by wood, burning it up and leaving ash. By OD the way a mill is powered by a river, drawing on a continuous flow without depleting the source. The ODA flow being used by the ship was enormous, but it was also rough. That was the word 3 separate practitioners used independently. Rouge, like a river diverted through cut stone channels instead of following its natural path. Efficient, powerful, but not elegant. Sina thought about this for a long time. Then she made a decision that was either the most consequential thing a human had ever done, or the most catastrophically reckless, and she genuinely was not sure which. She reached into the OD. She found the flow the ship was drawing on, and she nudged it. Just a nudge. A tiny, precise, impossibly skilled nudge. The kind of thing that took a master 30 years to learn to do. The kind of thing that, to anyone monitoring that flow, would say, "We know you're there, and we understand what you are using, and we can touch it too." Like, subscribe, and share. On the serene persistence of understanding, every ODA monitoring instrument on the ship went off simultaneously. Shavarethan had been asleep. She was in the operations center in under 2 minutes, still pulling on her secondary lip. The readout was clear. Something on the planet below had touched the ship's OD draw. Not attacked it, not disrupted it. Touched. Italiano. With precision so delicate it had modified the harmonic frequency of the draw by exactly 0.3% in a pattern that, according to the Compact's OD communication protocols, was the equivalent of a polite knock on a door. Shavarethan stared at this readout. Her dimensional specialist, a Kirath, named Velshari, who had been studying OD flows for 60 years, came to stand beside her. They looked at the readout together. Velshari said, "That is a greeting." "Shava," Ethan said. "I know," Velshari said. "That is a greeting using OD flow harmonic modulation at a level of precision that our Order of Resonance Masters trains for a decade to achieve." "Shavar," Ethan said. "I know," Velshari said. "This world is classified as pre-dimensional technology." Shavarethan said, "Yes, I know. Update the classification." The greeting was analyzed, reanalyzed, cross-referenced with every known OD communication tradition in the Compact's records. It matched nothing, which meant it was original, which meant whoever was down there had developed their own OD communication syntax entirely independenthy. Shavarethan thought about the 800 years of Kolsheth grooves in the dimensional layer around this system. She thought about what 800 years of quiet, patient, unassisted OD practice might produce. She replied to the greeting. She used the Compact's standard OD greeting pulse, the one taught to every diplomat, the one that meant, we are present, we are aware, we come without hostile intent. 6 minutes later, something touched their Odidra again. The response was in the Compact's own protocol, but there was something layered underneath it that Velshari had to look at 3 times before she believed it. Underneath the mirrored greeting, woven into the Oda current itself, like a second melody beneath the first, was a question. Not a word question, an Oda question, a structured inquiry expressed through the manipulation of dimensional flows that, if translated into language, meant approximately this: your current is running against its natural gradient. Would you like us to show you a more efficient path? The entire operations deck was silent. Shavar, Ethan said, very quietly. Send back an affirmative. The formal first contact meeting happened 12 days later, in a hastily constructed neutral facility on the surface of Iceland. Because Sina Alded suggested Iceland, and the governments of Earth, scrambling to compose themselves for the most significant event in human history, had decided that the person who had already been in communication with the aliens probably had reasonable judgment about Venya. The world was barely managing to hold itself together. 12 billion people had watched the ship enter orbit. 12 billion people had been watching news feeds and government statements and emergency broadcasts for nearly 2 weeks. The dominant emotional register of the planet was somewhere between awe and the specific kind of vertigo you get when you realize the floor you were standing on has been suspended over nothing the entire time. Sina arrived at the contact facility with 4 other senior members of the Flowing Order. She was met by representatives from 8 of Earth's major governmental bodies, 17 scientists, a security detail that was there mostly for optics, and a woman from the UN's hastily assembled First Contact Protocol Division, who had spent 11 days writing contact guidelines, and was absolutely not prepared for the fact that contact had already been made. The Compact delegation arrived in a shuttle that descended with the smooth, absolute silence of a thing that does not need to fight gravity. Shavarathin stepped out first. She was taller than expected. Her crest caught the Icelandic wind, and the membranes along its edge vibrated in a way that, in Vethki, indicated deep attentiveness. She looked at the assembled humans. She looked specifically and with noticeable focus at Sina. She said something in Veth. The translation device she wore rendered it as, "You are the one who touched our current," Sina said. "Yes," Shavar said. "How long have you been practicing?" Sina said. "I personally have been practicing for 31 years. Our tradition is 800 years old." There was a pause. Shavar said, "Without technology," Sina said. "We didn't need technology. Like, subscribe, and share." The next 4 months were among the strangest in human history, and that is saying quite a lot given the competition. The Compact delegation remained on Earth. More ships arrived from the Compact, cautiously, one at a time, carrying specialists and diplomats and, eventually, members of the Compact's Order of Resonance Masters, the most prestigious OD practice tradition in Compact space. The Resonance Masters had been training for 60 years each. They had technology to assist them: resonance anchors, harmonic amplifiers, dimensional boundary sensors that cost more than most planets' annual GDP. They arrived expecting to teach. They sat down with members of the Flowing Order, and they were very quiet for a very long time. The fundamental difference between the Compact's approach to OD and humanity's approach to OD was this. The Compact had always seen OD as a resource to be extracted and used. The animated realm was a reservoir to pump from. The resonance anchors were pumps. The whole system was extraction and application. The Flowing Order had spent 800 years learning to listen to OD, to feel its natural gradients and follow them, to find the places where the dimensional currents ran fast and deep and ride those instead of fighting the flow, to understand that OD was not a reservoir, but a living system. Not water in a tank, but water in a watershed, and that working with its nature rather than against it produced results that were, over time, vastly more efficient and far more powerful. The Resonance Masters sat with flowing order practitioners. They watched demonstrations. They measured the results with their instruments. They had a collective crisis of professional identity. Master Resonant, Kolvast, Ren, who had spent 40 years perfecting dimensional warp calculations and was considered the finest Odic technician in the compact, watched a 72-year-old woman from the flowing order named Grandmother Chow open a stable dimensional window between 2 points, using nothing but her hands and approximately 4 minutes of focused attention. He watched his own instruments verify that the dimensional boundary she had opened was more stable, more precisely calibrated, and operating at higher OD efficiency than any resonance anchor the compact had ever built. He said, "To nobody in particular, this is not possible." Grandmother Chow said, "In perfect calm it is possible. It just takes a long time to learn," he said. "How long did it take you?" She said, "About 40 years, but I started late. The young ones are faster." The young ones were faster. This became something of a theme. Earth had 14,000 flowing order practitioners. The Compact's Order of Resonance Masters had about 900 active members. The Compact had been working with OD for 4,000 years. Humanity had been working with it for 800. And in that 800 years, operating without any of the technological scaffolding the Compact used. Humanity had developed techniques the Compact had simply never conceived of, because the Compact had never needed to. When you have a resonance anchor, a machine that can force OD to flow where you direct it, you never need to develop the delicacy of perception required to feel where OD wants to go and guide it there instead. When you have harmonic amplifiers, you never need to develop the internal discipline of generating OD harmonics from your own perceptual field. When you have dimensional boundary sensors, you never need to develop the felt sense of dimensional boundaries that comes from spending decades learning to perceive them directly. The Compact had built exquisite prosthetics, and in doing so, they had never developed the underlying capability the prosthetics replaced. Humanity had no prosthetics. Humanity had only the capability itself. Raw, patient, hard-won, and after 800 years of refinement, extraordinary. The first crisis came in the 3rd month of contact. A compact survey vessel operating at the edge of the solar system encountered what the compacts called a location where the dimensional boundaries between layers had been where OD flow was chaotic and violent, and where a resonance anchor array could, if misaligned, cause catastrophic dimensional collapse. Shatter points were rare. They were also, when they occurred, extremely dangerous. The compact standard protocol was to mark them, quarantine them, and over a period of decades use resonance anchor arrays to slowly restabilize the dimensional layer. The expected timeline for restabilizing this particular shatter point was 11 to 30 years. Within that timeline, the shatter point would expand. It would, the compact's models projected, reach a diameter within 6 years that would disrupt dimensional navigation for a significant portion of the outer solar system. Shavar Ethan brought the report to the Joint Contact Council. She presented the projections. She was apologetic. She said the compact would assign a stabilization fleet. She said they would work as quickly as possible. She said she was sorry that Earth's outer system would be affected. Sina Ald listened to the entire briefing. Tense aside. "Can I see the OD current map?" Shavar showed her the map. Sina studied it for approximately 90 seconds. Then, she pointed at a specific location on the map and said, "There's a natural OD convergence point here, about 300,000 kilometers from the Shatterpoint Center. If you anchor the primary OD flow at that convergence and use it to create a counter-rotation in a dimensional boundary, the Shatterpoint should close in somewhere between 6 and 14 days. Dead silence. Velshari said, "That is not how dimensional restabilization works." Sina said, "It's how natural restabilization works. When OD flows converge correctly, they create dimensional boundary pressure that pushes unstable zones back into coherence. The shutter point is unstable because the flows around it are running against their natural gradient. Fix the gradient, and the boundary repairs itself," Velshari said. "We would need an anchor array of considerable scale to create that counter-rotation," Sina said. "No, you wouldn't. You'd need about 6 practitioners." Another silence. She said, "I'll go. Like, subscribe, and share." The mission to the Shadow Point was not officially sanctioned. Shavarethan approved it anyway. Sina took 5 practitioners with her, selected for their specific expertise. 2 who were particularly skilled at Odacurrent guidance, 2 who specialized in dimensional boundary perception, and 1 who had spent 20 years mapping Odaflow convergence points in the asteroid belt and knew the outer solar system's odotology better than anyone alive. His name was Darren. He was 30. He had been in the flowing order since he was 15. He had never been to space before. He spent the first hour of the journey pressed against the observation window watching stars. The compact crew watched him do this with an expression that, in Vethkai body language, indicated something between confusion and something that might be called tenderness. They reached the shatter point. From the seat, it was visible as a distortion in the dimensional layer that even the naked Vethkaya could see. A region where space looked subtly wrong, where things seemed slightly blurred or displaced, where the OD flows coming off it had a jagged, staticky quality like a radio signal breaking up. Velshari looked at it through her instruments. She said, "The instability is significant. I want to note for the record that I believe this is extremely dangerous," Sina said, noted. "Darren, where's the convergence?" Darren had his eyes closed. He had been in OD perception since they entered the outer system. He pointed. Not at a location on a map, just pointed, through the hull, in a direction, he said. There, about 280,000 kilometers out. It's a big one. The natural pressure from that convergence should be more than enough, Sina said. "Can you feel the gradient from here?" he said. "It's like standing next to a waterfall." "I can feel it pulling," she nodded. She looked at Shavarethan and said, "We're going to need to be as close to the Shatterpoint boundary as you're comfortable getting." Shaver said, "That is not very close. The OD turbulence at the boundary is considerable," Sina said. "We're going to be in the Oda layer." "The turbulence there actually helps." Shavar stared at her. She said, "You're going to be inside the dimensional turbulence," Sina said. "We're going to be using the dimensional turbulence. There's a difference." Shava moved the ship to within 40,000 kilometers of the Shatterpoint boundary. The instruments sang and screamed. The 6 humans sat in a circle in the ship's main observation bay, which Velshari had quietly cleared of all equipment on the grounds, that she did not want irreplaceable instruments, destroyed if things went wrong. They sat. They breathed. They went in. What happened over the next 11 hours is difficult to describe to someone who has never perceived OD directly. Velshari monitored the instruments throughout. She watched the Odaflow maps change in real time. At first, she thought the instruments were malfunctioning again. Then she thought there was a second Shatterpoint forming. Then she realized what she was actually seeing. The 6 humans were not directing OD. They were not pushing it or pulling it or pumping it the way a resonance anchor does. They were adjusting the flow, the way a river guide uses a paddle not to power the boat but to correct its course. Tiny, precise interventions that used the water's own energy to redirect it. The Oda current toward the convergence point was already moving. They were just clearing obstacles in its path. The shatter point began to close at hour 4. By hour 7, it had contracted to half its original diameter. By hour 9, Milshari was crying, a Kirath physiological response to overwhelming perceptual input, and she did not wipe her eyes because she did not want to look away from the instruments. By hour 11, the shatter point was gone. The dimensional boundary was intact. The OD flows around it were running clean, deep, and in their natural gradient, as though the instability had never existed. Velshari looked at her readings for a long time. Then she looked at the 6 humans, who were sitting in their circle looking exhausted and quiet, and one of them was eating a sandwich. Velshari said, "You restored natural dimensional coherence to a Class 7 shatter point in 11 hours. Our standard timeline for a Class 7 is 11 years, Sina said. It would have been faster, but there was a countercurrent we didn't expect. Velshari said, "The compact has never been able to restore natural dimensional coherence. We can suppress we can slow their expansion. We cannot close them and leave the layer clean," Sina said. "Clean is the only way we know how to do it. Like, subscribe, and share." The full implications took time to land, even on the compact, which had 4,000 years of experience with OD, and no history of being surprised by it. The compact operated on a model where OD was a powerful but manageable external resource. You built bigger anchors. You trained better resonance masters. You expanded the extraction infrastructure. What humanity had discovered, through 800 years of doing it the hard way, was that OD was not external. It was not a resource. It was a layer of reality itself, and it responded to the beings who worked within it the way a living system responds to anything that acts in harmony with its natural functions. The compact had been fighting OD for 4,000 years. Skillfully, powerfully, productively, but fighting nonetheless. Humanity had been learning to swim in OD for 800 years. The difference, once understood, was so fundamental that it required the compact's entire theoretical framework for dimensional physics to be The compact's High Council spent 6 months reviewing the data. Then they did something they had not done in the 1100 years since the compact's founding. They sent an official delegation to request instruction. Not consultation, not collaboration. Instruction. They asked if the Flowing Order would teach them. The Flowing Order debated this request for 3 months. This was actually quite fast by their standards. Sina argued for yes. Several of the older masters argued for caution. The debate was not about whether to share. It was about how. Because the Flowing Order's entire pedagogical tradition was built on the premise that you could not shortcut the learning. 800 years of teaching humans had proven, over and over, that the OD perception could not be transmitted through information. You could not read your way to it. You could not be told about it. You had to develop it, slowly, through sustained practice, through years of sitting in darkness, learning to feel the dimensional layer, through decades of small mistakes and corrections and gradual deepening. Technology could not replace this. It could assist it, perhaps. But if you gave a student a resonance anchor before they had developed their own OD, they would use the anchor instead of developing the perception. The compact had proven this, unintentionally, on a civilization-wide scale. They had very good anchors. They had very good resonance masters. They had no ODs. The Flowing Order's answer was yes, they would teach. With conditions. The conditions were essentially this. Students of the Order must begin without technology, regardless of what technology they had available. The compass, resonance, masters, those proud individuals who had trained for 60 years with the finest instruments the galaxy could produce, would have to set all of it aside. They would start where every Flowing Order practitioner started, sitting in darkness, feeling for something they could not yet feel, not knowing if they were doing it right. Trusting the process, Master Kovastarachan sat in darkness for 4 days before he felt anything. He had been practicing OD work for 43 years. He was one of the greatest resonance masters in compact history. He had been moved to tears watching Grandmother Chow work, and for 4 days in that darkness he felt absolutely nothing that he could call OD perception in the way the Flowing Order meant it. He felt his own heartbeat. He felt the temperature of the room. He felt impatience, a great deal of impatience, and the particular frustration of a very skilled person encountering something they are bad at. On the morning of the 5th day he felt something. It was very small. It was nothing like what his instruments showed him when he worked with OD professionally. It was more like a sense of presence, a very faint awareness of something that had directionality to it, that seemed to move in one direction more than another, that responded barely to his attention. He did not move for a long time. Then he said, aloud, though he was alone in the room. His instructor, a 26-year-old Flowing Order practitioner named Yuki Nance, was outside the door. She had felt him find it. OD perception develops partly through proximity to others who have it. Like learning a musical instrument in a room with a skilled musician. She opened the door, she said. "You've got it," he said. "I have something." "I don't know if it's the same thing you have," she said. "It will be." "What does it feel like?" He thought for a moment, he said. "Like the difference between reading a map and standing in a landscape." She smiled. She said, "Yes. That's it. Now let's see how far you can follow it. Like, subscribe, and share." They could not have known, then, what the compact's awakening to OD swimming would mean. Not in the short term, not in the decades that followed. The compact was vast, 147 member civilizations, hundreds of billions of individuals. When the new understanding began to spread, not as information, not as a policy directive, but slowly, person by person, teacher by student, in darkened rooms and quiet meditation halls and training facilities, built to the flowing order's specifications across 100 worlds. The change was unlike anything the compact had recorded in its history. Because OD responded to it, the entire dimensional layer around compact space began to shift. Not catastrophically, smoothly. The way a river adjusts its course when the landscape it runs through becomes more permeable, shatter points in compact space began to spontaneously stabilize. The OD flows in previously turbulent regions began to run cleaner. Navigation became easier. Dimensional warp became more efficient. Not because of better technology, because there were more beings in compact space who could feel OD clearly, and whose practice, however early and tentative, added to the collective density of OD awareness in the dimensional layer. The compact had a word for a dimensional layer in which multiple aware beings were actively working in harmony with the OD flows. The word was Veshin. It translates as the landscape that knows it is being walked. The Veshin effect was theoretical. It was something the compact's dimensional physicists had proposed as a possibility, a kind of resonant harmony between conscious OD-aware beings and the dimensional layer itself, that could, in theory, produce a self-stabilizing and self-deepening system. It had never been observed, because the compact had never had enough OD swimmers to produce it. Now, for the first time in recorded galactic history, in the systems around Earth, and a growing network of students and teachers spreading slowly through compact space, something that looked very much like the beginning of a Veshin was forming. Shavarethan filed her final report on the Earth contact mission from orbit above a planet that had, in the 2 years since first contact, changed in ways both enormous and intimate. 12 billion people were slowly learning that the universe was much larger, much older, and much stranger than they had believed. Most of them were handling it with that remarkable human combination of terror and curiosity and completely unreasonable optimism that Shavar had come to find both baffling and genuinely moving. Earth had sent its first official diplomatic delegation to the compact's capital. The Flowing Order had established formal training relationships with 11 compact civilizations. Deronese had been offered a position as the first human member of the compact's Dimensional Navigation Corps. He had accepted. He was currently somewhere in the outer arm of the galaxy, almost certainly with his nose pressed against an observation window. Shavarot. In her report, the most significant finding of this mission is not the existence of human OD practice. Extraordinaire as that is, it is what human OD practice reveals about the nature of OD itself. For 4,000 years, the compact has assumed that OD is a resource to be managed. The evidence of the past 2 years suggests that OD is a relationship to be developed. The humans of Earth stumbled into this relationship through necessity. They had no technology to substitute for direct perception, and so they developed direct perception. And through 800 years of patient, unassisted work, they developed it to a level that has now demonstrably altered the dimensional character of their star system. They have not just used OD. They have, in a real and measurable sense, befriended Italiano. The implications for compact dimensional science are not incremental. They are foundational. I will spend the remainder of my career thinking about what this means. She paused. She added one more line. I am grateful that we listened. When they knocked, Sina Ald was in her garage when Shavar's ship departed. She felt it go the way she always felt ships going now. A familiar disturbance in the odd currents of the outer system. Something she could track the way you track a friend's car down the road. The garage was quiet. Outside, a light Icelandic rain was coming down, which was not unusual. She had a cup of tea. She sat with her OD sense open, feeling the dimensional layer around her home, around her city, out through the country, over the ocean, threading through the planetary crust, rising into the atmosphere and beyond. It was different than it had been 2 years ago. Richer, more complex, more populated, in a sense she could not quite put into words, not just with human practitioners, of whom there were more than ever, More students coming into the order every month as the world slowly absorbed the reality that this was real. This ancient tradition that had seemed like a meditation cult was the reason. The aliens had come in a spirit of inquiry rather than extraction, but also with new presences. Vethkai, resonance masters who were learning to feel. Karat students sitting in their own dark rooms on worlds she had never seen. 11 other species, reaching tentatively into a dimensional layer that had always been there, that they had always been touching, that they were only now beginning to actually feel. The Oda layer around Earth was busier than it had ever been, and it was not rougher for it. It was smoother, deeper, more coherent, like a landscape that has been walked by people who loved it. She drank her tea. She felt the rain come down. She felt, faintly, through hundreds of light years of space and time and dimensional resonance, something that she could only call an acknowledgement, a barely perceptible shift in the odor flows of a distant system where a young Vethkai student had, this morning, in a darkened room, finally felt something, and known it for what it was. She smiled. 800 years had built something the universe itself was beginning to remember, and humanity had only just arrived. Like, subscribe, and share. Thank you so much for watching this epic HFYOD saga all the way through. If this story moved you, challenged you, or made you see humanity differently, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with every sci-fi fan you know. Your support makes these stories possible. See you in the next dimension. The Veshin was not a weapon. This was important. Because the first thing every compact military council asked when they heard about it was whether it could be used as one. The answer was no, and the reason was simple. The Veshin was a state of harmony between Odi-aware beings and the dimensional layer itself. You could not weaponize harmony any more than you could weaponize the fact that a river runs smoothly when its banks are not collapsing. The military councils found this answer unsatisfying. Shavaret then found their unsatisfaction unsatisfying. She said, in a closed session of the Compact's Strategic Dimensional Council, the Veshin is not a weapon, but I would strongly suggest you think very carefully before sending warships into a region where it is forming. They asked why. She said, because OD runs clean in a Veshin zone. Because clean OD is enormously more efficient than rough OD. Because any vessel using resonance anchors to extract OD from a Vessin active region will find that their anchors are working against a dimensional layer that does not want to be extracted from and is now, for the first time in galactic history, capable of expressing that preference. There was a long silence. She said, the humans have a saying, you can fight the river or you can ride the river. In a Veshin zone, fighting the river means the river fights back. The Strategic Dimensional Council filed this under. Noted, monitor situation. Revisit in 10 years. Sina Alde, when informed of this outcome, said, 10 years is fine. We've been patient for 800. Like, subscribe, and share. The second crisis, unlike the first, was not a natural phenomenon. It arrived in the form of a species called the Dreshel. The Draciel were not members of the Compact. They had been invited twice, and declined twice, on the grounds that membership required submission to dimensional navigation treaties that would have limited their use of resonance anchor arrays in contested space. The Dreshel did not like limits on their anchor use, because the Dreshel had built their entire civilization on a particular technique of OD extraction that the Compact's own scientists considered reckless. Deep or animated realm tapping, which involved punching resonance anchor arrays so far through the dimensional boundary that they reached the deepest currents of the animated realm, the oldest and densest flows of Odian existence, and drawing from those, it was extraordinarily powerful. It was also, by any reasonable measure, the dimensional equivalent of drilling for oil directly through a fault line. The Dreshel had been doing it for 600 years. Their space was a patchwork of shatter points, dimensional scar tissue, and OD deserts where the flows had been so thoroughly depleted that navigation was nearly impossible without massive anchor. They had moved past caring about this because they were, by any conventional military metric, the most powerful civilization within 400 light. Their fleet arrived at the edge of the solar system. 7 months after formal first contact between Earths and the Compact was announced. 43 warships, each one carrying a deep-bore anchor array, capable of punching through to the animated realm's base currents. Their opening communication was brief. It said, "We understand you have a dimensional resource of unusual quality in this system. We are here to assess its extraction potential. We advise you not to interfere with this assessment." Shavorethan, still present in the system aboard the Serene Persistence of Understanding, sent back the Compact's formal territorial sovereignty notice and a request for negotiation. The Dressel response was, "We are not a Compact member. Your territorial notices do not apply to us. Begin extraction assessment in 6 hours." Shavor sent an emergency communication to the Compact High Council. Then she went to find Sina. Sina was in her garage. Of course she was in her garage. Shavar's voice came through the communication device on Sina's workbench. She explained the situation. She said, "I want you to know that the Compact will respond with everything we have. Our nearest military fleet is 18 hours away." "I am sorry that there will be a gap," Sina said. "How many deep-ore anchors are on those ships?" Shavor told her. Sina was quiet for a moment. She said, "If they fire deep-bore arrays into the Oda layer around this system right now, what happens to the Veshan formation?" Shavor said, "It would be disrupted. Severely. Possibly. Irreparably." Sina said, "Yes. I know." Another pause. Sina said, "I'm going to need 24 hours notice before you send in your military fleet." Shavor said, "Why?" Sina said, "Because I need time to work and I don't want anyone else touching the OD layer while I'm doing it." Shavor said, "Sena?" "Those are 43 warships," Sena said. "I know," Shavor said. "What are you going to do?" Sina said, "I'm going to ask the river what it wants to do. Like, subscribe, and share." What Sina did over the next 22 hours was never fully documented. The Compact's dimensional sensors recorded it. The recordings were reviewed by every senior resonance master in the Compact. Most of them agreed that what they were seeing was technically impossible. What the sensors showed was this: the Oda flows throughout the solar system, not just around Earth, not just in the outer system, but everywhere, throughout the entire heliosphere and extending several light towers beyond it, began to move, not chaotically, not in response to any resonance anchor, because there were no anchors involved, in a pattern. A vast, slow, deeply organized pattern that the Compact's analysis algorithms took 9 hours to classify before returning a result that the senior analyst stared at for a long time before calling her supervisor. The pattern was a response. The OD layer of the solar system was responding to something. To Sen. To the 14,000 practitioners of the Flowing Order, who had, at Senna's quiet request sent through the Order's internal communication network, sat down together at the same hour in their homes and meditation halls and offices and garages all over the planet, and opened their OD sense, and held it open and waited. 14,000 people, 800 years of accumulated tradition, all of them, together, at once, simply present in the dimensional layer. Not pushing, not pulling, just there. The OD layer felt it. That was the only way to describe what the sensors were showing. The dimensional layer of the solar system felt the collective presence of 14,000 OD-aware beings, and it responded the way a Riva responds when thousands of Ans are placed into it at once, feeling the current, attending to it, understanding it. The Oda flows organized. They deepened. They quickened in ways that increased their natural pressure against the dimensional boundary from the inside. The animated realm side of the boundary, usually a region the Compact never monitored directly because it was considered stable background, began to show readings that Velshari described later as if the animated realm itself had moved closer, as if the boundary had thinned, not from our side, but from the other side, as if something in the animated realm was pressing toward us. The Dreshel fleet had begun their approach. Their anchor arrays were powering up. The lead Dressel vessels sent a final communication. "We are beginning extraction assessment. Maintain safe distance." Then the Oda layer of the solar system did something no resonance anchor had ever done, and no Oda theoretical model had ever predicted. It pushed back, not violently, not like a weapon, like a watershed that has found its level. The Dressel Deepor arrays fired. They hit the dimensional boundary of the solar system's OD layer and the energy came back. All of it, not reflected as a weapon, not redirected as an attack, simply returned because the dimensional layer was running at a pressure and coherence that meant there was nowhere for extraction to go. You cannot drill into a wall that is pressing outward. The Dressel flagship's anchor arrays overloaded. Not catastrophically. They simply shut down, the way any system shuts down when it encounters more resistance than its tolerances allow. 12 more vessels attempted their arrays. All 12 encountered the same result. The Dressel fleet stopped. They sat at the edge of the solar system for 3 hours. Then they sent a communication. It said, "We would like to understand what just happened. Like, subscribe, and share." The negotiation that followed was not what anyone expected. The Dressel were not eternaut, interested in conquest. In any ideological sense, they were interested in OD extraction because they needed it. Their home systems were critically OD. 600 years of deep bore extraction had left dimensional scars so severe that their own navigation was becoming unreliable. They had come to the solar system because their sensors had detected the richest OD density they had measured in centuries. They were, in a way that was both frightening and deeply sad, desperate. Sina spent 3 days reading the detailed reports on Dressel space that the compact provided. "Tensesite, I want to talk to them," Javert said. "They are not particularly interested in talking," Sina said. "Show them what happened to the Shatterpoint. Show them the sensor records from all 22 hours of what the Order did last week. Show them the Veshan formation data. And then tell them that we will come to their space if they want us to," Javert said. "To do what?" Sina said. "The same thing we did here. Their Odelia is damaged, not dead. If they have anyone in their civilization who can learn to feel OD, we can teach them. And while they're learning, we can help stabilize their dimensional layer the same way we stabilize the Shatterpoint." Javert said, "That will take years." Sina said, "Yes, we are good at that." The Dressel received the offer with what their communications translated as deep suspicion, which was reasonable. No civilization had ever offered to help them before. Most civilizations they encountered either fought them or fled from them. The Dressel had long since concluded that this was simply the nature of galactic relations. The offer of instruction, of repair, of patience, reached their High Extraction Council and sat there for 2 weeks while it was examined from every angle for deception. They found none, because there was none. They sent back one question. "Why would you do this for us?" Sina wrote the reply herself. She said, "Because you are standing in a damaged river asking where the water went. We know where it went. We know how rivers work. And we have learned, over 800 years, that a river that flows well is better for everyone who lives near it than a river that has been drained." She paused. She added, "Also, honestly, your OD depletion problem is starting to affect the dimensional layer of neighboring systems, including some that are developing Veshan formations. We have personal reasons for wanting that fixed." The Dressel High Extraction Council read this reply. One of them, a senior anchor engineer named Drevath, who had spent 40 years building the most powerful extraction arrays in Dressel space and who had watched them fail against a human woman sitting in her garage, said, "I will go." He was the first Dressel student of the Flowing Order. He was also, Sina noted later, one of the fastest learners she had ever seen, perhaps because he already understood, better than most, exactly how much power there was in OD flows when he worked with them, rather than against them. He had spent 40 years measuring that power from the outside. It did not take him long to feel it from the inside. Like, subscribe, and share. Years passed. The Veshan around Earth deepened and spread. It moved, slowly, like weather systems move, following the paths of OD practitioners, expanding as more beings learned to swim rather than pump. The compact began calling it the Sina current, which Sina found embarrassing. She said, "It's not named after me. It's named after the planet and the Order in 800 years of work by thousands of people I never met." The compact said, "Yes, but it started in your garage," she said. "It started in a collapsed mineshaft in 1223 CE. And the woman who started it never got any credit at all," the compact said. Fair point. What was her name? Sina said. Hildegard of the Black Veil. The compact said, "We will update the records." The dimensional cartography of the galaxy was being redrawn, not dramatically, not overnight. But the maps of OD flows maintained by the compact's navigation core showed changes that the oldest cartographers in the service had never seen in their lifetimes. Regions that had been turbulent for centuries were smoothing. Dimensional scar tissue left by old shatter points. And extraction damage was slowly, incrementally healing. The animated realm itself, that adjacent layer of dense OD that the compact had been pumping from for 4,000 years, was registering changes in its deep current pressures that the compact's theoretical models had never accounted for. Vilshari, now the compact's foremost expert on Vaishya dynamics and OD flow ecology, published a paper titled Evidence for Responsive Behavior in the Animated Realm as a Function of Physical Layer, OD Awareness, Density. The paper argued, with extensive sensor data, that the animated realm was not a static resource. It was a system, a living system, in the functional sense, that responded to what was happening in the physical layer. When physical layer beings extracted OD aggressively, the animated realm's deep currents thinned and retreated, the way groundwater retreats from aggressive pumping. When physical layer beings practiced OD swimming, present and aware and in harmony with the flows, the animated realm's deep currents strengthened and moved closer to the boundary, the way groundwater rises toward the surface when soil health improves. The compact's theoretical framework had always treated the animated realm as the source and physical space as the user. Velshari's paper suggested that the relationship was reciprocal, that what happened in physical space shaped the animated realm as much as the animated realm shaped physical space. That consciousness, specifically OD-aware consciousness operating in harmony with dimensional flows, was not just a user of OD, but a contributor to it. The paper was the most controversial scientific document published in compact space in 300 years. It was also, within a decade, the most cited. Deron Nase read it in transit between two star systems, his feet up on the navigation console of a compact, dimensional survey vessel where he was now the lead autocurrent reader. His title in the compact's navigation core was technically Senior Dimensional Analyst. His crew called him the River Walker. He had been in space for 4 years. He had perceived ODA flows in 23 star systems. Each one was different. Each one had its own character, its own currents, its own relationship to the animated realm, the way every river has its own character shaped by its landscape and its history. He had gotten very good at reading that character quickly. He had also gotten very good at explaining what he was perceiving to compact crew members who were learning to feel it themselves, slowly, through the proximity effect, through weeks of working alongside someone who swam in OD, the way he had learned to swim in it. He was, without quite having set out to be, a teacher, like Hildegard's apprentice Gerhard, 9 centuries before him, like every member of the order who had sat in darkness and then turned to help the person beside them find what they had found. He looked out at the stars and felt the OD currents threading through the system they were approaching and thought, "This one is a young one. The flows are quick and a little turbulent, the way a river is in its upper reaches before it has found its bed." He said to his navigation officer, a Veth guy named Ashfell, who had been practicing odeisance for 8 months, "What do you feel from this system?" Ashfell closed her eyes. She was quiet for a long moment. She said, "It feels like it is still deciding something." Darren smiled. He said, "Yes, that's exactly right. Like, subscribe, and share. On Earth, in Iceland, in a garage that had by now become something of an unofficial pilgrimage site for flowing ordered members who passed through the country, Sina Olde sat with a cup of tea and felt the outer layer of a galaxy that was slowly, irrevocably, beginning to change. She was 63 years old. She had spent 37 years in the flowing order. She had, by any reasonable assessment, altered the course of galactic history twice. She did not feel like someone who had altered the course of galactic history. She felt like someone who had spent a very long time learning to pay attention and had been fortunate enough to pay attention at the right moment. The Order had a new intake class of 400 students this year. Not all from Earth. 41 were Vethki. 17 were Karath. 6 were Dreshul, which would have seemed impossible a year ago. Tai were all right now, somewhere in the world, sitting in darkness, feeling for something they could not yet feel. Uncertain if they were doing it right. Trusting the process, she felt the orders of the presence across the planet, the way you feel a familiar piece of music, recognizable and various, and alive, and woven through it, threading between the human presences and extending out far beyond the planet. She felt the new ones, the other species practitioners, still early, still tentative, still learning the first movements of something that would take them years to understand. But present, they're adding their attention to the dimensional layer, contributing to the vision that was growing outward from this small, complicated, 12 billion person world that had stumbled into OD perception through a mineshaft in 1223 and had been quietly, patiently, stubbornly swimming in it ever since. She thought about Hildegard of the Black Veil. She thought about what it must have been like to fall into that chamber, to reach out and have the light reach back, to understand that you had found something completely unprecedented and have no idea what to do with it. She thought about the 9 days Hildegard had spent in that chamber. She thought about what she must have learned. She thought about what it took to burn every page and teach it only through the hands, person to person, in the dark. For hundreds of years, trusting that the knowledge would be kept, she thought. Hildegard. We kept it. The rain came down outside. The Odilea hummed with the presence of 1,000 species taking their first careful steps into something ancient and alive and patient. 800 years of one tradition. 4,000 years of another. And now, finally, something that belonged to no single species and no single tradition. Something that the galaxy itself was learning to participate in. Something that Velsharia's paper had only begun to describe and that no theoretical model yet fully captured. A conversation. The oldest conversation between consciousness and the dimensional ground it stood on. Between the beings who had learned to listen and the universe that had always been speaking. Sina finished her tea. She put the cup down. She felt the Odilea settle around her like a familiar room. She thought, we have 800 more years of work ahead of us. And for the first time in galactic history, she thought, we will not be doing it alone. Like, subscribe, and share. Thank you for watching this complete HFYOD saga. If this story reached something in you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with every fan of epic science fiction you know. This story is for every person who ever sat in the dark and kept reaching. See you in the next dimension.